Tonight, a ship's voyage to the ocean floor. Japanese Canadians revisit a town they were forced to leave, and learning about the mysteries of the sea.
Check 6 News with me, Jung Lee.
Good evening. It got its start in 1943, carrying ammunition for the British military during World War II. At one time, the GB Church was BC's largest fish packer. Now, after its long and varied history, the old rusty ship can make another claim to fame. This afternoon, it was deliberately sunk to become BC's first artificial reef. It was scuttled in 30 meters of water off Sydney in hopes it will become a diving haven and a major tourist attraction. Harry Monyu has more.
She badly needs a paint job. But then again, where she's going, she won't need one. The 53-meter-long, 248-ton freighter is destined for the bottom of the ocean, in waters about 30 meters deep, just off Port Dot near Sydney. Once sunk, she will become the first artificial reef in BC, and largest on the west coast.
This vessel will be much nicer on the bottom than it was rotting up the Fraser River.
It's going to be the home for a lot of different sea life, do you think?
Oh, lots of sea life. The white plumose anemones and the bull kelp will adhere to it very quickly. Many different kinds of fish will also live inside as protection. And it will be a nice haven for fish and wildlife, and also a great tourism diving spot for the west coast of British Columbia.
The GB Church was stripped of all lead, zinc, and copper. Holes were cut in her sides to provide easy access for divers.
Well, nobody's really sure exactly what it's going to take to finish her off, but what we're doing is we're putting water into the main cargo hold. Now that's going to be what you call free water. When we open the main sea valves in the engine room, it'll start the stern down. This water will shift to the back, should drive the stern down underwater, allowing the main cargo hold to flood evenly, and down she goes.
And how long will that take, you think?
We're not sure.
There goes Bill Church.
Captain Bill Church leaves the ship for the last time.
Yeah, it should be a little to your starboard there. We're looking at 55 feet of water, and so therefore we should be probably heading the bow a lot more to the south, over.
What's significant as a white marker is where we want the bow of the church. This has got the proper depth on it. So the tug is coming over now. If we can take a look at the church, we've got the back end of it anchored now. The front end we're bringing up slowly now into position of this marker. From this time on until the boat actually goes, the tug's job will be strictly to hold the nose of the boat on the marker until time where she actually goes down.
Okay, she's going down by the bow, but she's very flat, so...
Here's something you don't see every day: a captain giving directions on how to sink his own ship.
No, once you open them up, get out of there and just start getting all your stuff off, and just leave them open and get right out of there.
So we're getting some water into the engine room, get the stern down a bit lower, and it shouldn't be much longer, but we're pretty new at this, so.
And it didn't take much longer to witness a once-in-a-lifetime sight.
The door is underwater.
Come on! Woo-hoo! All right! Oh!
Tonight, a new diving haven opens in waters off Sydney. The mysterious death of local wildlife, and it's up and away for the snowbirds.
Check 6 News with me, Jung Lee.
For divers, it's everything they had hoped it would be. What they're raving about is the province's first artificial reef. The GB Church, an old freighter, was sunk near Sydney yesterday. It took just 45 minutes to hit the ocean bottom, and now diving enthusiasts say they have an underwater playground to be enjoyed for many years to come. Harry Monyu reports.
Unlike most sinking ships, the GB Church went down with a lot of fanfare.
This morning's the diver's paradise. You don't have to wait a few months.
Divers, it's hoped, will now flock to BC's first artificial reef.
It's really beautiful, especially today on a nice day and everything. The sun's coming through. There's lots of ambient light, and it's really nice. Visibility settled down a little bit yesterday because of the sinking. It was a bit murked up because it just hit the bottom, but things have settled down and it's really looking pretty. Perfectly upright. It's just about at the depth that we had selected for it. It's just about perfect in every way. We swam through most of the access holes that we cut, and everything seems fine. There was a slight bit of damage at the stern where the ship hit the stern first. It jammed the rudder up a little bit and caused some metal damage there, but other than that, everything's fine.
If the Artificial Reef Society has its way, this won't be the province's only artificial reef. Right now, they're negotiating with the Canadian Navy to get their hands on an old destroyer. If successful, it would be quite a coup, because it would become the largest artificial reef in the world.
Substituting for Pamela Martin.
Sheffield Steel in Liverpool in 1943, the GB Church is a coastal freighter with a colorful BC history. If she could talk, the church would tell of making wartime provisions runs across the English Channel, of transporting case lots of dynamite from James Island to various BC ports, and of serving as the largest fish packer in the province. For the past 8 years, though, the vessel has been tied up, slowly rusting away. As we followed her on a final journey, we learned that the end of the GB Church will not be without purpose.
I have an old fuel tank here that's been cleaned out and made as a void so it doesn't hold air.
Her glory days as a freighter are long over, yet the 48-year-old GB Church continues to make history, even though the active duty she's being prepared for is a far cry from her former life.
This was left in the elements for so many years, 7 years plus, I'm sure, and it just doesn't seem feasible to actually put this back into service, not at a cost-benefit factor.
The GB Church is about to become BC's first artificial reef and the largest deliberately scuttled vessel on the west coast of North America. All the lead, zinc, and copper have been removed, and dive team members have inspected the ship to certify her safe for recreational diving.
We've cut away these areas for the divers to have free-flowing access from the cruise quarters, or what used to be the cruise quarters, and then directly into the engine room. The engine room has been completely stripped away. There's absolutely nothing in here to get hung up on. And it's just a wonderful area to dive in. The divers can flow in, go around, come back out, go down into the cargo hold, and just have a wonderful time.
This first project of the fledgling Artificial Reef Society is expected to generate $1 million a year in tourist revenue.
The idea of artificial reefs as a tourism promotion really got the kickoff in South Florida. And if you talk to people in the Dade County office, they'll tell you that they virtually took a dead diving industry and really pumped it up very quickly with artificial reefs. If we sink it, they will come.
The Society already has plans to sink more unused hulls, including a Canadian destroyer. Within a couple of years of life on the ocean bottom, the GB Church will be a fish nursery and lodging area for various marine life. At Princess Margaret Marine Park near Sydney, the GB Church is ready to make her final voyage, a voyage to the bottom of the sea.
Sinking a ship like this is not an exact science, so the attitude it takes when it hits bottom is what we're concerned with. We'd really like it to end up on an even keel or a nearly even keel.
600 tons of water flows in. They open the sea cocks and deliberately let the sea have what it never was meant to have. Mariners may say it's tantamount to treason.
Sinking a ship as opposed to cutting it into razor blades is a far more dignified end for a ship. And naval people, mariners in general, like the idea of giving a ship a decent burial and having it live on, putting something back into the marine environment.
In tonight's news, free at last.
I'm really happy to see it free, and hear an airplane, and hear an automobile.
An American hostage is released after 5 years as a captive in Lebanon. Human misery. Albanian boat people defy Italy's decision to send them home. And puppy love. A dog auction prompts protests in Cornwall, Ontario.
CTV News with Dave Wynn.
And one of the old ships that plied the British Columbia coast went to the bottom today. The GB Church survived the English Channel during the Second World War and then carried dynamite along BC ports. Now the aging ship has a new mission. It was sunk as a new home for fish and scuba divers.
Designed to serve a number of purposes.
Over the next couple of years, there'll be a colonization of this ship by the marine creatures from adjacent reefs. We'll increase the biomass of the area, and when you increase the pelagic life and the filter feeders, you end up cleaning up the environment by cleaning up the material in the water and also attracting more fish in.
The GB Church was built in Liverpool in 1943. It has a net weight of 248 tons and worked the last few years as a fish packer in BC waters. It takes a lot of work to get a ship ready to be sunk. Once the process starts, it doesn't take long to complete. Unlike a vessel that sinks accidentally, the GB Church went down in an even, stately manner. These underwater shots taken by a cameraman from Water Visions shows just how she sits on the ocean floor.
She's sitting on an even keel. Yeah, it's beautiful, man. You couldn't have placed it better if you dropped the tide down 55 feet. It's a perfect thing for a park, let me tell you.
The GB Church may be gone now, but she's not forgotten. Bob Gillingham, CBC News.
Church's last lunch. Over the weekend, the 48-year-old freighter was transformed from a seagoing ship to an ocean-bottom reef. Tourism officials hope it'll attract marine life and more than $1 million tourist dollars annually to BC's newest artificial reef. An octopus's garden or a salmon smorgasbord. One thing's for certain, there's a lot of room for sea life in the freighter's hull. She was sunk on Saturday in Princess Margaret Marine Park near Sydney. It took nearly 3 hours to fill the hull with water and lower her to the bottom. Now, there are no fish settling in yet, but within the next 50 years, the reef will be teeming with life, becoming a home for marine species that could not normally survive in the muddy seabed.
Good afternoon. This is Midday for Wednesday, August 14th.
And on the show today, new life for an old ship. The GB Church was rusting out until a group of divers and environmentalists got together. They're creating Canada's first artificial reef. We'll go underwater near Sydney, British Columbia for a visit.
Windsor golfer Tamara Tobin has fought for the right to golf during prime time at the Beach Grove Golf Club there. She won, but new women members don't have the same privileges. We'll have that story.
And the Bare Naked Ladies. They're not bare, they're not naked, and are they ladies? No.
No.
What they are is a musical phenomenon, though, and they'll be performing here. First, though, Sheldon Turcott and the Midday News. Does that mean we're sunk?
Well, we're still up, I think. Welcome back. It's not all that often that when you see a ship sinking, you think good news. Well, in this case, it happens to be good news. We'll explain that in a minute. Also coming up on this show of shows, a Windsor woman golfer has filed a complaint with the Ontario Human Rights Commission. She fought for the right to play in prime time at her golf course. She got that right, but new women members won't have the right. We'll talk to her today.
And out of suburbia comes a new group called the Bare Naked Ladies. They call their music acoustic hip-hop, and if you don't know what that means, stick around. Tom New has a review of Blue Lagoon, the 1991 version, but first, a reincarnation.
For 40 years, the GB Church plied the oceans of the world as a freighter and fish packer, but since 1983, the ship has been out of service and succumbing to age and neglect. That is, until this past weekend. Cleaned out and pumped out, she was scuttled off Sydney, BC. Now the sunken ship has a new life, 20 meters below the surface. She's been turned into Canada's first artificial reef.
With us from the dive site near Sydney is Jay Straith. He's president of the Artificial Reef Society of BC. Hi, Jay.
How are you doing, Tina?
I'm fine. Now tell me about this project. What exactly is an artificial reef?
Well, you see, an artificial reef occurs a number of different ways. You can put down rocks in some areas, and we've chosen to put down a ship here as a means of enhancing marine life and promoting dive exploration and tourism in British Columbia.
Well, how does that work? I mean, how does the ship promote marine life?
Well, basically, the area to my sides is underwater is like Saskatchewan, like around Regina, Saskatchewan, very flat. And the same thing when you get a ship dropped on a submarine prairie like that, you'll get the current hitting the ship full on with nothing obstructing it. Now, you know how in mountain areas where, for example, around Calgary, the mountains come right out of the prairies, you'll get a lot of microclimates and very unique flora and fauna occurring in those areas because of the sudden change in altitude. Well, much the same thing occurs in an artificial reef because you've got the vertical relief, and then what happens is the current will hit this area, and the hard form of the artificial reef will attract marine life, and it will be fed by the current.
Any particular kind of marine life that would be attracted to it?
It's hard to say exactly what will happen, but we expect things like plumos, anemones, various type of rockfish, and lingcod, and items like that to attract themselves to this ship. Just to give you an idea of what's happened so far is that yesterday divers were down. They found 5 or 6 3 to 4 foot small sharks circulating in the main cargo bay area. Also, an octopus had chosen to make the stern of the vessel its new home.
Wow, I hope the sharks were friendly.
They certainly were. They certainly were. And the interesting thing is we kind of hope that in the next little while this will be known as a glorified lingcod condominium development, if you like.
I guess the commercial part is for divers, that they get to go down and explore this thing.
Yes. The studies done in the United States and a study that was repeated here in Canada projected that a single artificial reef would be worth between $1 and $5 million to a local economy. And we hope to be able to get some kind of accurate reading on that over the next few months and see what kind of increase in diving activity we have in the Sydney area.
And the divers don't disturb the marine life when they go down there and look around?
No, because most of the marine life is filter feeder marine life that comes in. And what you'll have happen is that during the months of February, March, and April, you'll have things like lingcod starting to lay their eggs on the ship. Divers generally do not disturb those kind of animals. They know better than to disturb them. And what will happen is that the divers and the fish will develop a very comfortable relationship with each other. There's other natural shipwrecks that have occurred, and you'll go down and the lingcod virtually ignore you when you're in the area.
You sank the ship on Saturday, right?
Yes.
And this is the GB Church, and it saw a fair amount of action in its day, didn't it? I mean, it was an old ship, had been used for a variety of things. Any sadness when it got the boot, so to speak?
Well, Bill Church, the gentleman who named the ship after his father, was quite sentimental when he wrote it out with us. He was talking about the history of the ship, but he was kind of pleased to see that the name of his father and his ship is going to live on as Church Reef. So it's kind of a nice touch to have one of her final skippers take her out to put her to her rest.
That's great. Okay, so you've got your suit on there.
Yep.
Go to it, and we'll check back with you later in the show, and you can take us on a tour.
Sounds good, Tina. I'll see you in a bit.
Okay, bye-bye. We're about to go underwater. Earlier in the program, we were speaking to Jay Straith, and he was telling us about the GB Church. That's a ship that's been sunk off Sydney, British Columbia. It's to be used as Canada's first artificial reef. Well, Jay is back with us now from aboard the GB Church in the wheelhouse. Hi there, Jay.
How are you, Tina?
I'm fine. Is it cold down there?
Oh, it's beautiful down here. We've gone down, we've been taking a look at the sharks that are in the cargo hold. We even saw a seal around here earlier. We have a school of herring that have started to settle down around the mast.
Gee, it sounds wonderful. Now tell me, what's this place going to look like a number of years from now?
In a couple of years, this is going to look like an underwater version of Bouchard Gardens. What will happen is the beams forward will get covered with plumose and anemones. The area around here will become a hatchery or a nursery for various types of fish. Over.
And you say that's only going to take a couple of years. All that will have happened.
Yes, we're not really sure exactly how fast things happen, but the rate of growth of marine life here in the last couple of days could show that in this kind of high current area, things can happen relatively quickly. Over.
Now tell me about the holes that have been cut into the ship. What are they there for?
Well, we cut holes for a number of reasons. Some of them were to help us sink the ship. Others were to help us provide proper habitat for various types of fish, such as bullfeels and lingcod. Over.
I guess it also makes easier access, though, for divers, easier places to go into.
Yes, Tina. We've decided to open the ship up as much as possible to make sure that the ship is very safe for sport divers to enter and exit at will. Over.
So is anybody then who's a competent diver, a good diver, could in fact do what you're doing, be in exactly the same location that you're in now?
A sport diver with very little experience could come down and enjoy himself on this wreck. If you like, this wreck's almost like a ski hill with beginner, intermediate, and expert dives. In fact, you should come out sometime, Tina. I can take you down.
Well, gee, Jay, it sounds wonderful, but I have a feeling it's a tad warmer and drier up here on the midday set, or I guess I should say the midday cabin.
Well, with things like a dry suit, there'd be absolutely no problem. People in Canada don't understand how wonderful our marine environment is in this country. The diving here is second to none in the world. With modern technology and things like the dry suit I'm wearing, there's no reason why a lot more Canadians don't take up diving. Over.
Can you show us around a bit, Jay?
We've got the exit over under the starboard side of the bridge. And over on this side, we've got the rest of what's left of the bridge of the GB Church. This cabinet here kind of blew up. The water pressure that hit it when the ship was down. I think you've already looked at the videotape of that sinking, haven't you?
Yeah, we saw it earlier in the show. It was really spectacular.
Yeah, the hydrostatic pressure blew a few things up in here. Here's an interesting little thing. Over here, you can already see the oxidization of the aluminum in the vessel. And some things are already starting to happen with the various metals and objects in this ship. Over.
So you can see things starting to change already, even though really it's just been a couple of days.
Just in a couple of days, things have started to change. It'll be a bit of a living biology lab for people over the next year or so to watch how things actually happen on the church. Over.
Well, it sure sounds wonderful. Thanks for the tour, Jay.
Okay, have a good day, Tina.
Okay, Jay. Thanks for talking to us. It's been fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ships to provide a habitat for fish and a destination for divers. And as Alan Carter tells us, the Society has just gotten its hands on a ship which will mean big money benefits for BC.
The HMCS Chaudière, once the pride of the Canadian Navy. In 1957, she was one of the most modern anti-submarine ships in the world. Decommissioned in 1974, it seemed the Chaudière was destined to become scrap. But the Artificial Reef Society of BC is giving the ship a second life. They're going to sink it and give the Chaudière the most positive role any warship has ever had.
So you take this out, you sink it. What happens then?
It becomes an instant artificial reef, basically. And
what is an artificial reef?
Well, what an artificial reef is, it's a man-made structure. It could be pilings, it could be rocks. In our case, it's a ship. Mm-hmm. And what it'll do is it will attract marine life from adjacent reefs, mm-hmm. And they will eventually, in time, colonize. And you'll get your fish coming through, then your filter feeder. You'll get bull kelp adhering to the ship, and it becomes a sanctuary and a nursery for the marine life. Mm-hmm. For divers, it's a diving haven. The ship has 6 decks.
Is this unusual to have, an artificial reef of this size?
It is, actually, yes. You don't get warships just every day. This will become the 3rd largest artificial reef in the world. For British Columbia, it will become the largest artificial reef actually on the west coast of North America.
Are divers going to be able to come down here?
We think so. We'll have to open up some of the hatches.
Right.
And we'll have to decide which areas can be opened up safely.
Do you have to know exactly what you're doing? I mean, you don't want to be a novice diver and come down here, do you?
Well, we're going to try and develop this artificial reef for novice divers, intermediate, and advanced.
What's this going to do for BC?
It's going to drive a lot of tourism dollars, a tremendous amount of tourism dollars.
Right.
We have people calling us right now from all over, from the United States, Eastern Canada, even abroad, asking about what's the status with Chaudière.
The Chaudière will go down about 3 months from now off the coast of Gabriola Island near Nanaimo. Studies project the artificial reef will pump up to $1.5 million into local tourism per year.
So we're looking forward to one of the hottest artificial reefs in the world.
It's actually the 2nd time they've done this in BC. Here's a little map to show that the Chaudière is not far from Nanaimo near Gabriola Island. Another vessel, the GB Church, was sunk last year not too far from the BC ferry terminal at Schwartz Bay.
In a few weeks' time, she'll be the pride of the West Coast divers. Whether you're a ship lover or a former Canadian military man, the HMCS Chaudière is a name from the past. But for divers around the world, it will soon be more than a name. It will be a destination. Kate Corcoran now on the underwater resurrection of the Chaudière.
This is how the Americans do it in Florida. Oil tankers and retired tugboats instantly turned into artificial reefs. On BC's west coast, it's a little less violent, a little more safety conscious. In fact, it's taken months to prepare this metal skeleton. By September, the Chaudière will begin a new life underwater.
What's this?
Okay, we're in the operations room, or the war room. And this was the room where all the planning and tracking for the submarines took place. There were plotting tables here, and plexiglass graphed plotters hanging on the wall. There was a bunk for people to take shift turns here, and we have all kinds of rangefinder machines.
So about where all the sonar equipment might have been.
We're going to maintain this. This is going to be the fun part of the dive, to keep equipment like this aboard so divers can play with the knobs and see how things turn and get an idea.
When it's sunk come fall, the Chaudière will be the world's third largest artificial reef. A sanctuary for fish, a challenge for divers.
There'll be so many people on this vessel all the time, from all over the world. No one's had an opportunity to dive on a vessel like this or any other size vessel fully intact, so it is a very exciting thing. It's going to remain that way for a long time. And as the Artificial Reef Society grows and contributes to the marine environment by placing other vessels or other objects in the water, they in turn will be very excited to dive on, and it becomes a sort of a circuit or tour, if you will, for divers.
Structures like cement blocks or the Nakai off Porto Cove add excitement and act as nurseries for underwater species. Last year, the derelict freighter GB Church was sunk just off Sydney. There are hopes for a diving circuit of 6 in all, each one attracting $1 million annually.
I was on the GB Church last week. We found 12 different varieties of fish, thousands of fish fry, a lot of mature fish that are a lot older than the ship on the ship already, laying eggs, and we see a lot of indications of fish laying eggs on artificial reefs, a lot of filter feeders, barnacles, plumose anemones attaching themselves to these ships. So in Canada, we don't really know how fast it works. All we know at this point is it certainly works.
But it's hard work preparing this vessel. Every weekend, scores of volunteers don overalls and dream.
20 years from now, when their children come in and say, we were diving on the Chaudière, I'm going to tell them, I sank it.
Well, it's a good bunch of people to be working with, and I really feel happy to be contributing to the ecology in the area. And
how many hours have you put in here volunteering? Rough estimate.
Oh, hundreds anyways. Might be 1,000 hours. I don't know.
Really?
Yeah, could be.
Is it worth it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You get more than 1 or 2 chances in a lifetime to sink a destroyer.
This is what's called Burma Row. There's one on every military vessel. From stem to stern, it just keeps going and going and going. It's actually 200 feet long, one of the attractions to keep divers coming back to explore. Where are we? What is this?
We are now in the main bridge, and we've kept a couple of instruments on board here as well, like this rangefinder. And if I knew you were coming today, then I would have dusted. I had no idea.
Talk to me as a diver. What will you do?
This is the exciting thing about diving. From my experience in diving for 18 years, I see myself coming through this door right here, and just simply pulling myself along this nice railing, which we intend to keep on, looking down into the operations room, and then just sort of flowing down. It's a beautiful dive, and we have opened up a lot of the areas that were actually closed off with walls, so that the divers can see very carefully and cleanly exactly all parts of the ship as they flow through it.
The man-made reefs off the coast of Florida have been attracting tourists and their dollars for years. They are an industry unto themselves, the kind of industry local divers are developing here in their own waters.
Well, it seems like a real labor of love, and Kate Corcoran is with me now to tell us, now where are divers going to find this underwater treasure once it's been dumped?
Hopefully by early September, it will be down just off the coast of Gabriola Island. That's very near Nanaimo. It'll be about 3/4 of a kilometer away from any shore. And actually what they're hoping for is, they've had about 160 volunteers help, but volunteers are always welcome. All you need is a pair of gloves. If you are interested, please call Kathy at 263-3942.
Area on Vancouver Island. But it's not taking visitors for tours. It was sunk a year ago by a group called the Artificial Reef Society and is now a popular diving spot. Well, now there's a plan to scuttle an old Canadian destroyer in the Gulf Islands. But as Alan Edwards reports, some people say the environmental damage isn't worth the boost to tourism.
The South Vancouver Island community of Sydney is known for its sunny harbor and its marine setting. It is also becoming one of BC's major destinations for sport divers.
There we go.
More and more expeditions are heading out to dive on a one-time coastal freighter that was gutted and then deliberately sunk to provide a destination for wreck divers who come here from all over the world.
I've talked to some friends that have dove, and there's a giant octopus off it. There's lots of prawns, carp. It's just a great life. Yeah.
Well, we're hoping for a good day. Lots of viz.
Yeah, let's hope for good viz, yeah.
Well, I expect to see a wreck at about 70 to 100 feet. I understand the history of it, so I'm looking forward to the dive.
Sport diving is one of the world's fastest growing pastimes, and it means big bucks for charter operators who organize expeditions. The GB Church was scuttled in 90 feet of water last August. She landed right side up on the bottom, just as planned. Divers did it, and divers use it. But it's the local economy that benefits the most.
It's becoming world renowned, actually, and we're very pleased about that.
So it's put Sydney on the map, this Sydney?
That's right. Yeah, Sydney by the sea.
It's such a good example of what wreck diving is all about. And I think it kind of gives people a taste of wreck diving and really gives people the opportunity to dive on a wreck that's in such fantastic condition like that.
Start our dive on the stern, descend the mast, and we won't waste a whole lot of time. We'll go forward. We'll go play at the forecastle.
For some, it's an anniversary dive, 1 year after the sinking of the GB Church. Others will experience it for the first time. Word of the GB Church destination dive has spread through the international diving community, and they're coming to these waters by the thousands.
How many divers have you had on board this ship, and where are they from?
I've had roughly 1,700 divers, and they've been pretty well worldwide. A lot of Western European, a few Eastern European, and some from the Far East, and all of North America.
Is the artificial reef, formerly the GB Church, a real draw for divers?
Yes, it is. It has attracted more divers to the area. It's made the area far more prominent as a diving destination just by having this wreck here.
No one is disappointed, as the wreck of the GB Church affords safe access.
Well, it was more the experience of penetrating a wreck. Very dark, limited visibility, and a good test of one's training. Very enjoyable.
You went right in, did you?
Yes, of course.
Well, there's barnacles starting to grow all over it now. A lot of shrimp, a few of the swimming nudibranchs, some bright orange and yellow ones. Really beautiful. But they've done a really good job with the wreck. They've cut a lot of the loose stuff away so that you can swim through there and there's really nothing to get snagged up on. It's very safe for divers.
Would you like to dive it again?
I'll be back here pretty soon, I think, yeah.
The GB Church, I think, is a huge success. GB Church attracts and is a focal point for divers to come. It's a safety asset to train divers, and it's an economical boon for the tourism, so it's terrific. It's just a tremendous asset, I think, for the industry in general, and it focuses also on the waters that we have here already and makes people aware that probably next to the Red Sea, this is the best diving spot there is in the world.
Workers have been gutting the former Canadian destroyer, Chaudière, for months now, taking out fluids and asbestos insulation. They hope to sink her within a month.
Will this be even more popular than the GB Church?
I think it will be. If you look at the ship, the GB Church would fit comfortably from the stern of the ship to the mortar bay. That leaves you with approximately 200 extra feet of ship. Talking to the people in Sydney, we used to say, look, if you sink it, they will come. Well, as far as Sydney is concerned, we sank it, and they're there. The fish are there, the tourists are there. And when the Chaudière goes down, the same thing's going to happen off the Nanaimo, Ladysmith, Gabriola Island areas, that you're going to get a lot of tourism churn up internationally and domestically.
We have several concerns. First is we believe it's fundamentally wrong to go and dispose of an old ship by sinking it. It legitimizes littering.
Lawyer Chris Haynes is among Gulf Island property owners opposing the sinking of the Chaudière. Coast Watch fears environmental damage, mainly from asbestos insulation.
The area where they're planning to sink it now, near Thrasher Rock, is one of the most popular sport fishing areas in the province. I mean, you go through there in a boat, there are hundreds and hundreds of people out fishing every day, or at least on the weekends. It's the only time I've been by there, all the time. And they're going to put this right in the middle of that area. Well, that's where they want to put it. And it's going to cause serious problems to growth, reproduction, and mortality of the salmon and other fish in that area.
But the GB Church is already a major tourism draw for the Sydney area of South Vancouver Island. And the people there are already talking about more ships to be sunk as artificial reefs in the nearby waters. Alan Edwards, CBC News, Sydney.
We've just received word.
Chaudière may have found a final resting place in Seychelles. It was supposed to be sunk off Nanaimo to form an artificial reef for scuba divers, but there was too much opposition in Nanaimo. So now a new site has been chosen, and all that remains between the Chaudière and the ocean floor are the necessary permits.
At first glance, she looks like a piece of junk. The fact is, there have been offers from as far away as Florida to buy her. At 110 meters, the Chaudière is destined to become the largest artificial reef on the west coast of North America, and the only naval destroyer in that role anywhere in the world. The decommissioned vessel was to be sunk off the coast of Nanaimo, an underwater monument for scuba divers to enjoy, until the plan got drowned in bureaucratic red tape.
Asbestos is not a problem. There are no problems with any other kinds of contaminants on the ship. It's got a clean bill of health. And we're just at a complete loss as to understand why the project is being stonewalled for Nanaimo.
It sounded like a good idea. Good for tourism, said backers of the plan. It would bring underwater visitors here from around the world.
I believe that the bureaucratic process was influenced by specific interest groups. The specific interest groups made so much noise that it delayed the process to such a degree that it's now too late.
Those special interest groups, Island Trust and environmental activists, say they don't want sunken junk in their neighborhood.
This day of pollution prevention, day of recycling, people are aware of what problems we create by polluting the waters. So the last thing we should be doing is putting down a 3,000-ton piece of metal that is going to cause problems in our straits.
There's no flushing action in the inlet there. It's quite a confined area, and I think it'll have a more adverse effect on the stocks of the sea life in that area than it would if it was put out in the open ocean. I'm against that also, but it's just totally wrong altogether.
The fact is, salvage crews under the supervision of a number of control agencies have been stripping down the Chaudière for months, removing the pollutants. Only the skeleton of the Navy ship is to be sunk.
At this point, it appears that they've made up their mind and they have killed this project for Nanaimo, and so we're going to proceed with Seychelles.
What might be Nanaimo's loss could be a win for the Sunshine Coast. The new plan for the ship is to sink her in over 30 meters of water in the Seychelles Inlet later this month.
It is in an area where you shouldn't have a NIMBY problem because there is nobody to have it in their backyard in around there.
Meanwhile, back in Nanaimo, the diving community that is so much in favor of the sunken ship idea finds itself on dry land.
Just the amount of work that went into this project for 8 months or a year, and volunteer work going over there every other weekend or whatever to do volunteer work on the ship and site work, and it's pretty disheartening.
Sinking the Chaudière is not a new idea. The Artificial Reef Society sank an old coastal freighter, the GB Church, off Victoria last year. There's no pollution. Fish and marine life thrive here. It's brought hundreds of thousands of tourist dollars to BC, and divers explore her again and again.
Rio Island, closer to Ladysmith, to be used as a reef for divers. But opposition by fishermen and environmentalists may have deep-sixed that plan for good. If that's the case, Sydney could be the site of one of the world's largest artificial reefs.
One year ago, the GB Church went down with a splash off Sydney. And today, the wreck continues to make economic waves in the South Island community.
It's been a real economic thrust. We are a small community. It's an older community, and we don't have that industrial base that a lot of cities have. So this has been an absolute plus for the town of Sydney.
And for that reason, the town is anxious to add to the underwater fleet.
The amount of positive aspects that will be generated by this vessel is phenomenal. For instance, in tourism alone, you know, it's been already surveyed that there would be at least a 1.3 million increase in revenue just for the local area with one vessel. With two, this will multiply. So there's a tremendous positive aspect to this.
They're eyeing a decommissioned destroyer, the Chaudière. For a time, it looked like the ship would go down near Link Island, halfway between Ladysmith and Nanaimo. But the site has been challenged by residents, environmentalists, and fishermen.
We've got all these fish that are nursing in this area. They're very sensitive. They're small fish, and they're really susceptible to any pollutants. And I'm really against having that thing down there.
When trouble stirred the waters off Ladysmith, the Artificial Reef Society turned its attention back to Sydney. With the GB Church as a leading example, there aren't the same environmental concerns.
What you have is now is a complete coating of barnacles covering the hull, and of course, along with that, you've got hydroids and bryozoans, nudibranchs, various species of crabs, and all of these things have brought in a population of rockfish, mostly copper rockfish, and there are other schools of smaller fish, including sculpins and that sort of thing. So the changes in the last, say, 5 months have been very impressive.
This morning, the signals that I was receiving over the fax machine indicate that very probably it'll go off of Rum Island, which is just outside of Sydney here, and we're looking forward to that very much. We worked in the church for over 2 years, so when that went down, we had a lot of experience behind us. Since that time and during that time, we have been working on the Chaudière, so we already have a lot of infrastructure in place that would, I'm sure, make it a very successful sinking of this artificial reef.
But BC Parks isn't saying just yet where the final destination will be.
Site basically, I guess, hasn't been set of where that's going down. I know they're looking at a location off of Gabriel Island right now. And if that doesn't go through, they also have a location, I understand, on the Sunshine Coast, Pender Harbor area. This is probably the third alternative site that they'll look at.
We're already getting inquiries from all over the world, and while the BC government appears to now oppose us sinking the ship in the Nanaimo area, it'll either be sunk up around Pender Harbor or down in the Sydney area, and we're sure whoever gets it is going to find themselves with something that's going to be producing $500,000 to $1 million a year in extra tourist revenue.
While the selection process continues, a Vancouver salvage company is scrubbing down the 110-meter vessel in preparation for its final resting place.
I'm figuring 42 minutes for the sinking of the Chaudière. That's my bet.
Good evening, everyone. Scuba divers have a new playground, a 366-foot Canadian destroyer escort. The HMCS Chaudière was sunk today off the Sunshine Coast. It's the third largest artificial reef in the world. Diving organizations say the wreck will generate millions of ecotourism dollars for Seychelles. But as Mike Bothwell reports, the project has been a tangled web of politics.
It's a gray morning, a grim final wake-up call for the HMCS Chaudière. This scrap from the Canadian Navy is about to sink into 100 feet of water near Seychelles. And right away, there's a sign of trouble. The RCMP is out in force to head off protesters. There's been a long battle to stop this sinking.
The destruction of the most beautiful inlet in the world is taking place today. They're going to sink the Chaudière, the naval vessel that's 300 and some odd feet long. Obviously, any elementary person would realize that paint itself is saturated with lead and other anti-foul chemicals that will destroy the environment eventually.
We have all the science on our side, and they have scientific opinions from lawyers and French immersion teachers. There is absolutely nothing but pseudoscience behind what they're saying.
But concerns for the environment did force the Reef Society to scour the ship thoroughly. And the Chaudière was also supposed to have come to rest originally near Nanaimo. But residents there killed that idea, forcing it to be towed to Seychelles. As you can see, quite a few people have turned out to watch this ship go down. But security is very tight, lots of RCMP here, almost no sign of protesters. The people who are opposing this sinking say they expected to win an injunction in court yesterday, and when that didn't happen, they didn't have time to mount a full protest. There was one small demonstration on shore. but mostly onlookers just waited for the explosion that would rip a hole in the ship and send it to the bottom.
You want to flood her from the back forward. So the idea is you get as much water into her as quickly as possible, and that will make her go down pretty damn quick.
They've done the explosion. You can see the ship is starting to tilt, and when the stern starts to go underwater, it'll really go down quickly.
The Weekend News Hour with Jennifer Mather.
The last hurdle was cleared last night in the courts, and today the HMCS Chaudière was sent to its final resting place. The Sechelt Indian Band lost its bid to stall the sinking of the old Navy vessel in Sechelt Inlet, and this afternoon, after a couple of years of preparation and thousands of hours work by volunteers, excuse me, the Artificial Reef Society had its day.
She makes a good-sized cabin cruiser look like a toy. The gutted framework of the HMCS Chaudière sits in Porpoise Bay near Sechelt, where she's about to be sunk as an artificial reef for divers from BC and around the world to enjoy.
This project cost between $130,000 and $150,000, 9,000 hours of volunteer time, and really 3 years of work.
And how quick will she go down?
Really, that's not an exact science. It's more art, but we figure anywhere between 20 minutes and probably 45 minutes.
On shore, some of the people who have dogged the project for months, the protesters who want the tourist attraction stopped, leading the challenge local natives who lost a last-minute court fight to kill the plan.
The judge actually made a statement, and he said, this sinking of the Chaudière won't hazardize the environment at the present now. It'll be decades. See, he actually confirmed it. It is going to be a hazard in the future, and he still went ahead and didn't pursue our injunction in court.
The Sechelt Inlet is really an inland sea. It's a pristine channel with an abundance of marine life, salmon, and oyster farms. And the protesters who are taking a stand here believe it could be harmed if the ship is sunk.
What's happening here is just a degradation of the local environment. It's an insult to everything that's natural. The arrogant attitude of the artificial, I underline Artificial Reef Society, to change this ecology, this environment, to so-called improve the environment, has no respect for what the universe provided.
The Chaudière, a 366-foot reserve vessel, was bought for $1. Built during the nuclear scare 35 years ago, she has sprinklers and rounded edges to wash away any potential fallout. She was a product of her time, too old and out of date. She was mothball bound.
Where we are right now will be the first deck that is open to divers, and we'll be making a number of cuts and opening holes vertically and horizontally.
Get in and out.
So people can get in and out, and that there won't be any problem for divers.
It was the Artificial Reef Society, with the assistance of government, which came up with a plan to let her live on. The ship was gutted, all the harmful materials taken out, but a plan to sink her near Nanaimo was scuttled by environmental groups, so they moved here. There was a large presence of police, and the ship began her descent without a hitch. They used a chemical burning process to cut a hole in her hull, and in 10 minutes she was gone.
Well, we're looking around now. We got a few pieces of fiberglass in the water and a bit of marine and detergent and stuff, but anything to be serious with. We're just checking with Environment Canada. If they wanted a boom out, they tell us.
No oil slick?
No oil slick. Little bits of fiberglass, but that's about it. It's looking good.
The Chaudière is now 100 feet down on a sandy barge, and North America's largest artificial reef, a new tourist attraction for this part of BC.
On Friday, we told you of a court challenge by the Sechelt Indian Band who were hoping to prevent the sinking of an old destroyer. Well, the courts turned down the challenge, and on Saturday, HMCS Chaudière was scuttled off the Sunshine Coast.
At this moment, it lies in 80 feet of water in Sechelt Inlet and will be used by divers as an artificial reef. Tonight, we have some rather extraordinary video taken as the ship went down. Tape shot both inside and outside the destroyer.
The Chaudière had spent months anchored 9 miles north of Sechelt as the Artificial Reef Society of BC fought off a series of challenges by environmentalists. The RCMP were among the first on the scene to ensure there was no trouble, as last-minute preparations were made for the sinking. Society volunteers had extensively cleaned and stripped the ship, but protests would continue right to the end. Environmentalists and Sechelt Indians had been concerned about the effect of shipboard asbestos on marine life.
We try to delay the process so we can get our own technical people to look at the long-term environmental effects that the ship's going to have on the water here. You know, this is not an ordinary ship they're sinking here. This ship has been painted with fire retardant paint, asbestos. The metal is on that ship. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 10, 20 years from now. That was our concern, was the long-term effect on the ship once it went down.
I'm afraid the Sechelt Band got badly misled on this thing, and when I was talking, and Environment Canada were talking last week with people at the Artificial Reef Development Center, Dade County Department of Environment, New Jersey Department of Environment about asbestos they've had in the ships they've put down. And remember, in the United States, they've had over 950 ships sunk. They couldn't figure out what was going on up here. Most people in the United States, they had dealt with this asbestos issue back in the 1970s, and everybody was generally amazed that we were off on such a red herring hunt.
You guys, we get you back out of here, please, folks? Get a little bit closer, working on in and around here. Okay. We'd like you to just move back a little bit, please.
Police order spectators out of the general area. 100 vessels crowd off Cunitchin Point in Sechelt Inlet as the final marker buoy is dropped. Underwater camera experts mount video cameras on the bow and on the stack to record the sinking. The RCMP bomb squad has set explosives along the ship's keel.
Well, it was determined that the best place to sink or to get the effect that we wanted, to put the stern on the bottom first and then allow the bow to gradually sink down, was to put 4 holes in the forward end of the boiler room. And that's subsequently what we've done. We put 4 18-inch holes right next to the keel.
Go on inside.
Sit.
Sit.
That's fine. All right.
No, you definitely have a side.
Well, that's good. That's good. I preferred her vertically, but she's definitely landed on her side, and that's not bad. We had made contingencies for that, so everything was cut vertically and horizontally. When you saw that when we went through. She went down. How long did she take, John?
1830.
1830. Now let's go over and make sure we haven't got any debris, guys.
Going over on its side, it meant that, relatively speaking, things that were going to be, or should have been in, say, 40 feet of water are now over on their side in about 80 feet of water. So it's made a big difference in the depth. The bow is at about 105, and the stern is at 60 feet. It's an awesome dive. We went down the anchor chain at the bow, and then went into the wheelhouse and went passing through the wheelhouse, then back up over the decks, had a peek inside the wardroom, and then we followed the starboard rail back toward the stern, and then finished a dive right at the stern of the ship. I'd say give it 2 or 3 years and let the marine life move in and transform it into something on the seabed, and then I think we'll really have something then. But it's definitely going to make, if you like, make waves around the diving circles in North America, and I think that it'll draw a lot of people to the Sechelt area.
Alan Edwards, CBC News, Sechelt.
Good evening. This is Eyewitness Video. I'm Patrick Van Horn. Few of us consider video cameras to be an absolute necessity in life. Most people buy them to capture memorable scenes with family and friends. But for some, video is a necessity. Tonight, you will see its vital role and witness its vast reach in the modern world. Discover how...
Who's first to go?
Video reveals how the death of a ship creates new life.
There's a charm in going down and seeing a vessel intact.
A heartfelt effort to save a dog that's been the victim of a fire.
Vessel sitting there for so long, and all of a sudden it's gone.
35 years ago, the Royal Canadian Navy built the Chaudière, a state-of-the-art warship designed to hunt down submarines. She sailed the Pacific and North Atlantic until she was retired. She was destined for the scrap heap. But then someone came up with this idea: create an attraction for marine life and scuba divers by sinking the ship. A remarkable video diary of the project reveals how a ship's death results in new life.
Diving on a shipwreck is a very romantic thing for a diver. The idea of going into a shipwreck that is purposely sunk really is the same kind of romanticism. There's a charm in going down and seeing a vessel intact. In the creation of an artificial reef, we look for very rich waters where the moment you put down any type of structure, the current deposits food onto it, bringing smaller fish, bringing in larger fish, and so on, building up an ecosystem.
When we finished our first project at GB Church, there was quite a lot of interest in what we were doing with artificial reefs, and we had a line we had sort of borrowed from Field of Dreams: if you sink it, they will come. And we meant that in the sense of both the tourists will come and the fish will come.
The Chaudière was the most high-tech anti-submarine warship in the 50s in the world. The cost of this ship, according to the records, was $27 million. If the ship had been scrapped in total, it's possible that the government might have had $200,000 scrap value out of the whole ship. So the Artificial Reef Society said, well, look, why not give it to us? We think we can generate anywhere from $1 to $3 million in the near future by creating this ecotourism dollars.
We were able to get the bill of sale from the Government of Canada for $1 for one warship. She was really cannibalized heavily by the Navy for parts, and we managed to take quite a bit of the brass fittings and recycle a lot of the copper wiring out of her, and we used those funds to pay for the project.
Most of the stripping was done by volunteer laborers. And it was very thankless work. I mean, it was dirty and dusty and involved just filling up garbage bags with all kinds of debris and removing all kinds of machinery and so on from the inside of the ship. Now, the Navy did a complete program of cleaning out fuel tanks, of removing PCBs, removing other kinds of hazardous products. But basically, once they left, all the leftovers had to be removed by the Artificial Reef Society.
Anything that the environmentalists thought was bad, we took away.
The main concern on a pollution level is to make sure that no oil hits the water. And we worked with that vessel to get it completely oil-free. We took all of the fuel tanks, all of the various fuel systems, and disassembled them, and we literally got down and we hand scrubbed the bilge of the vessel. After 8 months of slaving away with the Chaudière in Vancouver Harbor, she was finally ready for transferring to Sechelt, British Columbia. We picked a spot that was not known for being particularly abundant with marine life. By putting the Chaudière in there, we could demonstrate the viability of artificial reefs, and also we would attract the ecotourism.
Now, sinking a ship is not an exact science, so we had no real idea of how the ship would go down. We looked over the ship and decided to mount 2 cameras, one very near the bow of the vessel, and the second high on the funnel looking over the stern area of the Chaudière. Meanwhile, dozens and dozens of boats had arrived upon the scene, and of course everybody's really anxious to get the show on the road. I mean, it was pretty exciting. You're going out to basically put a 366-foot ship on the bottom.
The idea here was that they wanted to put holes just forward of the boiler with a chemical burning process that is detonated, and the detonation is instant. Really just a flash, and then 4 18-inch holes are cut out. That's really the kiss of death right there for the ship. The emotions are rather high. I was in a Zodiac, keeping an eye on people around the ship. We didn't want to get anybody too close to it.
And the explosives guys were all ready to go. Boom, away she goes. Mind you, once you do that, you've lost all control, and the vessel just starts to sink, and if it wants to go over the side or whatever it wants to do, you don't have a lot of say in the matter. We're talking a huge ship, and once it starts to gain momentum one way or the other, there's very little you can do about it.
People see a ship sinking, it's a disaster. Well, this time there was a victory. There was a victory of people who had a vision, who had a dream, and were determined to see that dream come true. And as she went down, a great cheer went up and the horns went off and everybody was hooting and hollering. And it was a magnificent thing to see. Most divers can't afford to go to Papua New Guinea or Truk Lagoon to see the wrecks from World War II, and seeing those just remain a dream for them. Well, all at once, 45 minutes from downtown Vancouver, you've got the type of ship that you dream of seeing in the South Pacific. You're going to see the impact of the marine environment colonizing this ship. You're going to see all these things that most people don't get to see. The sinking of the Chaudière was not the destruction of a ship, it was a rebirth as something helpful to the marine environment, which I think is probably the best thing you can say for the last words on a great old ship.
It took just over 18 minutes for the Chaudière to sink. It'll take 3 to 4 years for marine life to colonize the vessel. Some worry that despite the precautions, the sunken ship will be an ecological hazard. Environmental officials will monitor the site periodically for the next several years. Next.
Hi, I'm your host, Doug Paulson, and welcome to Sport Diver. Today we're going to visit Sydney, British Columbia, Canada, for a unique look at the sinking of the HMCS Mackenzie. We'll follow the preparation and dismantling of this massive ship as it is readied for its new home on the ocean floor. We'll also show you the remarkable sinking as it actually happened. Later in the program, we'll travel to the Broken Islands group of Barkley Sound to dive on the wrecks of the Van Lean and the Thiepval. We'll also visit a salmon farm in the Alberni Inlet. And finally, we'll profile the mysterious six-gill shark. We have a fascinating program today, so stay with us. Sport Diver is brought to you in part by Paddy Canada. Continuing education is the road to diver safety. And by Maris. We supply the fun. Just add water. Our dive destinations this week are located near the southern Vancouver Island city of Sydney and the Broken Islands group of Barkley Sound on the western coast. In September of 1995, an incredible event was staged near Rum Island off of Sydney, British Columbia, the sinking of the HMCS Mackenzie. This massive destroyer was sunk on purpose to become one of the world's largest artificial reef projects. Today, we're going to take you on a tour of this magnificent ship before, during, and after the sinking. The HMCS Mackenzie was built in Montreal in 1961 and commissioned as a permanent member of the Canadian Navy a year later. She began her career as an anti-submarine destroyer escort and later went on to be used for officer training. The fact that there was never a shot fired in anger from her guns is a testament to over 3 decades of successful Canadian peacekeeping. Ships of this size and age are normally sold to private buyers for scrap metal or to other countries as used vessels. With her productive years long behind her, the Mackenzie had a more interesting fate in store when she was decommissioned in 1993. Rather than being cut up, as they say to make razor blades, the government was persuaded to sell the ship to the Artificial Reef Society of British Columbia. As an artificial reef, the ship would attract marine life where there was none before. The structure of the boat would provide a surface that aquatic life can attach itself to. This becomes a food source for smaller fish and invertebrates, who in turn attract larger species. Thus, a new and complete ecosystem is created. A location was chosen for the Mackenzie to provide an acceptable habitat for many different species, and also to carefully avoid damage to existing habitat. 2 years of preparation and countless meetings come down to the final few weeks. The main participants in the sinking are Gene Hemsworth of Paddy Canada and Project Aware, Tex Enemark and Jay Straith of the Artificial Reef Society of British Columbia, and members of the local, provincial, and federal governments. A week before the sinking, the ship was towed from New Westminster on the mainland to Vancouver Island and the Institute of Ocean Sciences near Sydney. Salvaging and cutting of access holes continued right up until the actual sinking. With several entry and exit points cut into the hull, over 80% of the ship is diver accessible. Most of the interior was made easily available to the experienced diver. Entry points are marked with warning signs to prevent novice or inexperienced divers from entering the vessel.
As you can see, large areas of the wall have been opened up for diver access. You can get 2 or 3 divers through here with no problem. You probably don't even need your lights here because of all the ambient light penetrating from the surface. So it's a great area just to flow into the communications room from the access of the wardrobe.
In the week before the sinking, tours of the Mackenzie were available to the general public. Hundreds of people lined up to catch a last glimpse of this impressive ship.
This was where the officers would eat. It's where they relax. There'd be sofas up there. There'd be a TV over there. They put up a big screen for the movies each night.
So this is the wardrobe, is that what you're saying?
There'd be a pantry, the bar, and my favorite spot, the fridge.
Told you before, the ops center was where everything was controlled from. The officer, the watch, would be up here, along with a navigator. They had a signalman sitting over there, and the bosun's mate would be sitting over here. This hole was not there at one time, again, to facilitate the divers.
She was commissioned in 1962, and at that time, there were about a dozen of us on our Trade Group 2's courses out here in Naden. And after the course was done, they flew us all to Sorel, Quebec. We took over as commissioning crew, commissioned her, sailed her to Halifax, where we stayed for approximately until May of '63, and came back then. I was a radar plotter. I was a seaman, basically, but my sub-branch was radar plotter. We worked in the ops room right below us.
On the flag deck, we'd have our cocktail party up in here, and our rations and stuff would come up from the galley from below. Flag deck would have the awnings spread out.
The day before the sinking, the ship was towed in front of the host city for the event. With a well-established diving industry, Sydney was the perfect choice as a location for the shipwreck. Curious onlookers gathered along the shoreline to view the ship as it passed in front of Mount Baker, a short distance away in Washington State. Navy minesweepers were on hand to witness the event and to transport the many dignitaries and officials to the site. Hundreds of boats, perhaps even close to 1,000, gathered to witness the event. Very early on the day of the sinking, a few scattered boats showed up early for a good vantage point. Onboard cameras were mounted to document the sinking from a unique vantage point. Right up until the actual sinking, work crews frantically readied the ship for its new home.
We're working on just the markers which will locate the stern, midship, and the bow. And essentially they'll become diver down type buoys.
Well, this is something we've been working on for more than 2 years, and it all gets down to the last 2 hours, the last half hour, the last 10 minutes. And when this is all over, I'm going to be so happy and so relieved.
As the time of the sinking grew closer, it was evident that the number of boats witnessing the event would far exceed even the most optimistic predictions. There were even a few hardy windsurfers weaving in and out of the tightly packed boats. When we return, we'll show you the remarkable sinking of the Mackenzie from several different angles, including cameras mounted directly on and inside the vessel. We'll also see how the ship looked underwater the next day, so stay with us.
My name is Tim Kane. I'm with the RCMP Explosive Disposal Unit in Vancouver. This is the charge form that we hope will cut a hole out of the Mackenzie. There's high pressure explosives on the other side. We'll bring the charge, the explosive wave from the back of the boat along deck cord lines here into the top and bottom here. The explosives on the other side of this wood frame will cut a hole out just exactly the same as this, and this compartment, which is the aft mag, will flood very quickly.
Police experts carefully cut the explosives into small strips. It's hard to believe this harmless-looking material can do so much damage.
These two lines here are detonating cord. These lines will carry the shock from the actual detonator at the aft of the boat. So when the firing button is fired, the detonator will go bang. These have high-speed explosives. The shock wave will carry forward along these lines to the charges that are actually in the belly of the boat.
The last official matter of business was a final toast aboard the ship. Dignitaries, former captains, and the media boarded the Mackenzie from a Navy minesweeper. Several commanding officers paid tribute to the ship's long and distinguished career.
Tonight, she leaves this beautiful land of light and air, where she will sleep in the arms of the sea for generations to come. So we want to say, as a last thing to Mackenzie, for now and the future, well done, Mackenzie. Mr. Roberts?
Mackenzie.
With all the people loaded safely off the decks of the Mackenzie, the ship was ready for her date with history. With hundreds of boats in attendance on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, this was an incredible event. Here's a look at how the ship went down.
Everything went basically according to plan. When the explosions went off, we got the water flooding into the ship very low down. That allowed the ship to drive forward in the water and settle basically on her keel. The way she went, as you can see, was quite spectacular, but basically we go down now and we can see that the ship is lying on both of her bilge keels. The propeller shafts are buried in the sand, and basically you have a ship standing upright.
The next day, a few lucky divers and volunteers were allowed to visit the new artificial reef. With only a slight list to one side, the ship made an almost perfect landing. Many of the artifacts were purposely left on board the ship for diver interest. The command bridge is easily accessible and at a shallow depth. Stairwells, companionways, and interior rooms are clearly accessible from several different entry points. The radar tower lies only 30 feet below the surface, with the decks and interior of the ship safely within comfortable diving limits. In a matter of minutes, marine life begins to inhabit the wreck. A large jellyfish is one of the first creatures to make an appearance. With light currents, lots of places to hang on, and several interesting penetrations, the ship will become one of the world's great wreck sites. For the HMCS Mackenzie, it is also a second lease on life.
Well, with these artificial reefs, it's a win-win-win situation. For diver training, we win. It's a wonderful training wreck. For our money, from the point of view of tourism, we win. It accrues $1 million plus per year. The biggest win of all, though, is from the environment, the animal life, the fish, have a new reef, and more importantly, the public becomes aware of the heritage that we have for both our children and their children's children and the future of the oceans.
When a ship goes down, everybody benefits. The ship benefits because it takes on a new life. But I think the real benefactor when the waters close in over a ship, the real benefactor is the future.
After the sinking of the
It's longer than a football field and weighs in at 2,800 tons. No wonder it's standing room only on the Sydney town dock just north of Victoria. HMCS Mackenzie's 33 years as a destroyer escort are over, and the town's come out to say goodbye.
Pretty sad.
Yes, it is sad, but at least they can do something good.
Something better than sending her to a salvage yard and cutting her up for scrap. Tomorrow, the old ship starts a new life as an artificial reef and a playground for divers. The Mackenzie's final resting place will be on the sandy ocean floor just off Rum Island, about a half-hour's boat ride from here.
I think it's great. Rather than being turned into sardine cans or razor blades, that's going to be another home for fish and a platform for divers to enjoy. So now the civilian people can enjoy it as much as I did.
Dive into BC's coastal waters and you're in another world. 2-meter-long wolf eels feed on crabs. 6-gilled sharks come up from the deep. Brightly colored anemones reach out to feed. And it's the home of the giant Pacific octopus. When a shipwreck lands on the bare ocean floor, it's the start of an underwater city, a magnet for sea life. First, microscopic plants and animals take hold. Then the fish move in, multiply, and a reef is born. But the Mackenzie's only part of a bigger plan.
We are ultimately going to sink 9 large ships. On that basis, we are going to create a scuba dive industry in this province, and British Columbia will become the wreck diving capital of the North Pacific.
An ambitious plan, especially for volunteers with day jobs. The Artificial Reef Society, a bunch of diving enthusiasts like Vancouver lawyer Jay Strait and Tex Enemark, public affairs consultant, spend all their spare time sinking ships so the tourists will come. It all started with a retired freighter, the GB Church. They sank her off Sydney in 1991, flooded her with water, and down she went.
Okay, is it going to be chillier today than if it was sunny?
No. It's the same. Once you get below 30 feet, it's water temperature same all year round here.
Right, cold. Today, Tex Enemark loves to dive the church and showed me what's happened to her after 4 years underwater. She may not have looked like much on the surface, but 85 feet down, she's beautiful as a reef. Her decks are home to 4-foot lingcod. Anemones and feather duster worms cling to her hull, life where there was almost none before. Across Georgia Strait, a couple of hours north of Vancouver, was the site of Project Number 2. This one was much bigger. Local businesses here raised $30,000 to bring the next ship to Seashelt Inlet, HMCS Chaudière, sister ship to the Mackenzie. The Artificial Reef Society had bought it for $1, stripped it down and cleaned it up to pass environmental inspections. But sinking this huge warship turned out to be one headache after another, starting with government bureaucracy.
You've got to understand that the Fathers of Confederation never dreamed of anything like artificial reefs. So basically in Canada, you have this absurdity of the fish in the water column belonging to the federal government, and in British Columbia, the bottom of the ocean belongs to the provincial government.
And while the bureaucrats were figuring out who should give permission for what, the environmentalists got fired up, along with the local Indian band who tried to get a court injunction to stop the sinking.
We had eco-freaks showing up on the project and claiming that that there was going to be toxic silica coming off the ship, and that the paint was going to wipe out the fish life for miles and miles. They were claiming we had every toxic substance on that ship except Jimmy Hoffa.
The judge didn't buy it. So in December '92, 5 months behind schedule, they blew holes in the Chaudier's hull. Water rushed in and she rolled over on her side. In 16 minutes, the ship was gone.
Enjoy your dive, the sunshine?
3 years later, Larry Bailey's cashing in. He used to be a combat diver in the Canadian Army.
Have a good one.
Now he runs a dive charter, 45 minutes north of Seychelles. Tamer than his first career, but a lot more fun.
You're still ugly.
Especially when you're making money. $75 for 2 dives. Scuba magazines say this is the best. Divers call it the Everest of wrecks.
Oh. Right on.
No argument from these guys.
Oh, it doesn't get much better than that.
Oh, just incredible. Just incredible. The visibility today and the fish we saw today was just great.
Percentage in business just in mine alone definitely has increased, 60%. And if you ask probably any other operators up here, and also the marinas and pubs, they've seen an increase.
And Canada's only getting started in the artificial reef business. In the U.S., old Vietnam war tanks are the latest addition to hundreds of artificial reefs around the country. These were sunk 2 years ago off Florida. Now tropical fish have moved in. Both government and the private sector put big bucks into artificial reef projects to improve the U.S. fishery. Back in BC, financing project number 3 was a tough slog. The Mackenzie didn't go for $1. This time the government wanted $200,000, the ship's assessed scrap value. The Artificial Reef Society got a government loan. They'll repay it by salvaging valuable materials like copper and brass from the ship. And the town of Sydney picked up the slack, kicking in $40,000. Won't take long to get that back, and more.
Well, we're using a ballpark figure here of this vessel of something, under $1 million a year. Now, if you reckon the ship will be at least 70 years for diveable purposes, you're looking at a lot of money over the years.
Having undertaken the HMCS Mackenzie Artificial Reef Project,
it's part fundraiser, part celebration, and part wake. A night before the sinking bash, complete with diver bubble balloons and proud warship label wine. For her old crew, a time to say goodbye. Though she never fired a shot in anger, the Mackenzie sailed 850,000 miles and spent the Cold War years preparing for the worst.
I'm feeling the nostalgia. The ship is a piece of metal, but she's also all those people who are aboard her making her work.
And what I'm hoping is that maybe my great-grandkids, as divers, will go down and say, hey, this is the ship that Granddad served in, and we're having a look at her. And that would be really nice. I'd like that very much.
Mackenzie.
A final toast aboard the Mackenzie 1 hour before the sinking. And anyone who owns anything that floats shows up to watch. The plan is to make this ship go down straight, to make it different from the Chaudière. But it's learn as you go. Warships don't come with sinking instructions.
In short, we've got marine engineering's answer to the Quebec referendum question. Nobody's really sure what happens. Just pull the plug and Lord knows what happens next.
Well, they're not actually pulling a plug. Down in the bowels of the ship, demolition experts set special 3-by-4-foot charges, much bigger than those used on the Chaudière, which should blow 8 holes below the waterline. The idea is to get as much water low down as quickly as possible so the boat won't tip. More than 1,000 boats surround the Mackenzie, waiting for countdown. Seconds to go. There's silence on the water. A camera on board is toward the explosion. With gaping holes below the waterline, the Mackenzie starts to sink quickly. And so far, she's staying upright. In less than 4 minutes, the ship is gone. But how did it land? There's only one way to find out. And the next day, we do.
So, Tex, are you happy with the way it went?
I think I'm delighted, but let's go take a look.
All right.
It's a perfect landing. Sitting on her keel, 96 feet down, almost dead upright. And next spring, another destroyer escort, the Columbia, will become the 4th artificial reef. Another step toward putting BC on the map as one of the best diving destinations in the world.